The big newsmaker this evening, one of the world's biggest bankers, is warning of a recession but is upbeat about India's prospects. JP Morgan's chairman Jamie Dimon spoke to Shireen Bhan during the company's India Investor Summit, where Dimon pretty much ruled out the prospects of a soft landing for the US economy and said a mild recession or a hard recession are the likely scenarios. Now, he warned investors to brace for volatility and flow of funds, saying markets can get fickle. Now, speaking about India's prospects, Dimon said China's supply chain is still not secure and that could benefit countries like India. Now, he also said he hopes for India's inclusion in the JP Morgan Global Bond Index.
One thing I could project with certainty is volatility in the markets. And because you can't have all this turbulence, this is going to go on for a while, yet you don't know where rates are going to change. The dollar is very strong. America is still strong. Isn't going to be a recession. What's the real effect of QT and getting rid of negative rates? You know, Europe is probably going to recession. That creates huge amounts of volatility. And unfortunately, that kind of volatility, I mean, you look at emerging markets and the strong dollar, you have to go country by country. You know, markets can get pretty fickle, particularly when you're investing in emerging markets, you know, venture capital, you know, things where small changes in assumptions can change the value of what you think something's worth quite a bit. So they should be braced for flow of funds that they don't particularly like. And, you know, the other thing about the dollar is that an economy which is outperforming other people relative to expectations will probably have a stronger currency. And America is still outperforming, I think, what most people kind of expect. And that may go on for a while. So the dollar may not strengthen, but I'm not sure you're going to see it weaken either. I think a soft landing is probably a very small chance at this point, but, you know, mild recession, hard recession, they're all possible. And you know, it's hard for me to give them odds, but they're all kind of possible. And remember, when I say get ready for it, I'm also talking to companies and investors where my real point is we're prepared for it so we can serve our clients. We're going to be serving clients in India regardless of whether it's a hurricane or a mild storm. You have people like America who want to be your ally and partner in many more ways. And then I think you have a little bit of a gift. This is not what I'm about to say is not anti-Chinese, but as every nation looks at, and every company looks at supply chains, they're going to have to diversify more. And a lot of people say China isn't as secure a supply chain and therefore have to move manufacturing to somewhere. And I think India could be a huge beneficiary of that. Absolutely, you should ask me, you should fight for it. And I can't get involved in that because research is independent. So by law, but if I was India, I absolutely want to be part of it. And if I didn't get in, I'd ask why. And then I try to accomplish those things, get in. And so I'm hopeful for you. And, you know, it is a sign of a country, you know, growing and becoming bigger and better well known. And once in indexes, the other thing it does for you, it's always out there. So you get a lot of foreign direct equity investment. This time you get also foreign direct credit investment.
And you can catch the full interview at 11 a.m. tomorrow right here on CNBC-TV18. The other big story we're tracking today, the Russian President Vladimir Putin has expanded his war efforts amidst reports that his troops are losing major territory in Ukraine. In a rare videotaped address, the first since his troops invaded Ukraine, Putin announced a partial military mobilization decree, stoking fears of a nationwide conscription. Russia's defense minister has said that the decree will see 3 lakh additional personnel being called up to serve in the armed forces. Ukraine described Putin's announcement as absolutely predictable, and that's not all. Putin also extended his support to referendum calls made by Russia-backed separatists in Luhansk, Kherson and Donetsk. Putin also accused the Western nations engaged in nuclear blackmail, said he will use all available means to protect his people, and added, and I quote, "This is not a bluff," end of quote.
I want to remind you that our country also has various means of destruction, and for separate components, and more modern than those of NATO countries. And when the territorial integrity of our country is threatened, to protect Russia and our people, we will certainly use all the means at our disposal. This is not a bluff.
Certainly here on the ground in Ukraine, there was an expectation that Vladimir Putin would offer some sort of response to these recent successes by Ukrainian forces in the northeast of the country. And it's not much of a surprise that he has now announced this partial mobilization of Russian troops this morning, which, according to his defense minister, essentially adds another 300,000 reservists to the mix in terms of people that they can deploy. And this is to try and deal with the massive manpower issue that's being experienced by Russian forces here on the ground. They were outnumbered by around 8-1 up in the northeast in the Kharkiv region, which was recently liberated. But it will take time to mobilize these forces, to train them, and there's no guarantee that they will deliver quality soldiers that will be up to the task here. And then Russia has the even bigger issue, perhaps, of morale. I spoke to Kyiv's mayor, Vitaly Klitschko, in July, who said to me, you know, Ukrainian forces are fighting to protect their families. Russian forces are just fighting for money. And he was convinced that there would come a point in this war where Russian soldiers didn't want to do that anymore. Perhaps we are at that point. And then, of course, looking ahead, these referenda, which have been called sham referenda by the White House, that are going to be held in Russian-controlled areas of Ukraine as early as this Friday, will essentially ask people there if they want to become formally part of Russia. Now, Russia will inevitably conclude that these people in these areas vote in favour of that. And the suggestion is that Russia could then consider these territories part of Russia. And how will that, what will that mean for the war in terms of how they respond to an attack on those territories? Certainly, it is a real concern now, given Vladimir Putin's rhetoric when it comes to nuclear arsenal this morning. But certainly comments coming out of the Kremlin do suggest desperation. They certainly suggest escalation, and certainly people in Ukraine are convinced that will inevitably result in a more dangerous situation here on the ground.
Well, stock markets came under pressure across the world after Vladimir Putin signaled an escalation of the war in Ukraine. Investors are also awaiting the U.S. federal decision later tonight. The Sensex slipped over 200 points and the Nifty slipped almost 100 points, snapping a two-day gaining run. Banks and mid-caps also closed in the red. Anu Singhal joins us with a wrap of all the market action.
Well, the market was a bit nervous today. A couple of events which sort of scared the market. First was this aggressive speech from Russian President Vladimir Putin in the morning. That sort of rattled the global market. And of course, ahead of the Fed event, the market was a bit nervous. Even though 75 basis point rate hike is factored in, the market's worried, what if it could be 100? Anecdotally, though, the markets normally move up after the Fed meets. So let's see how things move up. In terms of individual names, the Adani Group was under serious selling pressure today. Adani Ports from the index was down quite a bit. Adani Enterprises and the recent acquisitions, Ambuja and ACC, both were down, where, of course, there was pledge of equity. In terms of other stocks, we had Shree Cement, IndusInd Bank, Larsen & Toubro, Bharti, Tata Motors, and then the IT biggies, TCS and Infosys, both very close to 52-week lows. On the upside, it was the FMCG pack. ITC did well, Lever was doing well, and Britannia was the other stock which had some gains. As I said, tomorrow we'll react to the Fed outcome and tomorrow's expiry as well, so could be a very interesting day.
Anush, thanks very much for joining in with that. We will be watching out for that crucial Fed decision later tonight. Now, the Indian rupee weakened against the dollar today as investors braced for the US federal decision. The rupee ended within touching distance of the 80 mark near its record low against the greenback. Now, after 3 successive months of inflows into India, Credit Suisse has studied the source of the funds, and according to the report, 87% of the FPIs come through global, emerging market funds and sovereign funds, and only 13% account for India-dedicated funds. Credit Suisse is positive on financials as they believe that the sector is undervalued and see a possibility of earnings upgrades. However, the report also suggests India remains vulnerable if there is a global scare over emerging markets. In the banking space, rating agency CRISIL expects banks' asset quality to start improving, saying gross NPAs will improve by 90 basis points in this fiscal, 100 basis points by March 2024. CRISIL's data suggests that the biggest improvements will be in the corporate segment, where gross NPAs are seen to be falling below 2% next fiscal. We told you first, and it is now confirmed, Yes Bank's board has cleared the sale of its 48,000 crore rupee stressed asset portfolio to JC Flowers ARC. The bank has received no challenging bids to the base bid of 11,000 crores from JC Flowers. The board has also approved an investment needed for the acquisition of 19.99% stake in JC Flowers by the bank in single or multiple tranches, of course subject to regulatory approvals. SEBI chairperson says that the regulator will not allow products that curb exits or exchanges to charge for public data. She says that SEBI is open to innovations like algo trading, but the process must be transparent.
If the regulator senses that there is inadequate disclosure, then the question is the investor being misled? This is a little bit more aggressive form of the same issue. Is the investor being conned? If your business model is going to rely on a black box which is not open to sunlight for disinfecting, if it is not capable of being validated and audited, and your claims cannot be audited and validated, it cannot be permitted. A business model which relies on the assumption that once the customer is in, it's very hard for him to get out, we don't like it.
In more news, shares of Swaraj Engine zoomed in trade today after Mahindra & Mahindra said it will acquire an additional 17.4% stake in the company. Now, M&M will buy the stake from Kirloskar Industries, taking its stake in Swaraj Engines to over 52%. Shares of M&M as well as Kirloskar Industries also surged following the announcement. Volkswagen India will hike prices by 2% across all models starting next month. The German auto giant has cited rising input costs for the decision, but has not disclosed the new price list of its cars just yet. An NDTV's promoter group has moved the Supreme Court against a securities appellate tribunal order imposing a 5 crore rupee penalty for alleged non-disclosure of loan agreements with Vishwa Parishad Commercial Private Limited. Now, SEBI had initially imposed a penalty of 25 crores in December of 2020. The appellate tribunal reduced this fine amount to 5 crore rupees. The government is likely to extend the free ration scheme by another 3 to 6 months. Now, we learn from sources that the government has adequate food stock available to be able to extend the scheme. Timsy Japuria has picked up these details and joins in now. Timsy, take us through what you've learned.
Well, that's right. Sources have told CNBC-TV18 that the government is likely to extend providing free dry ration by another 3 to 6 months under the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana. What we are given to understand that government officials recently reviewed the stock situation and they feel that there are adequate food grain stocks available with the government to execute this scheme. Remember, if announced, this will be the 7th phase of the scheme and a formal decision is likely to be made public anytime soon. It was last on 26th March 2022 when Cabinet had approved the extension of PMGKY for another 6 months. That was starting from April till September this year, and the scheme is expiring on 30th September. Remember, nearly 3.4 lakh crore rupees of financial outlay and more than 1,000 lakh million tons of free food grains have been provided under this scheme, and this scheme was formally launched first in April 2020 to extend free ration to the poor to help them during the COVID hardships. So let's see what is the stand and how soon government makes this announcement. Sources say that yes, it's right on the anvil. Back to you.
Timsy, thanks very much for joining in with that. Now, in a bid to promote clean energy production, the government has approved a second tranche of the solar PLI scheme, allocating an additional 19,500 crore rupees as announced in the budget. The second part of the PLI for solar PV modules is aimed at increasing production of low-cost solar energy. The Road Ministry has issued draft rules making it compulsory for auto companies to install seat belt alarm systems for all seats of a vehicle. Reports suggest that these alarms will be made mandatory in four-wheeler vehicles under the M category, which includes vehicles carrying passengers, and also in vehicles under the N category, which includes vehicles carrying passengers as well as goods. Now, in a bid to ease congestion at ports, the government has allowed exports of broken rice consignments that are in transit until the 30th of September. Remember, the government had banned exports of broken rice on the 8th of September. Back on Court Corner today. Now, after 12 years of probe, the CBI has given a clean chit to former corporate lobbyist Neera Radia. The CBI has said it did not find any criminality in the taped conversations of Radia with politicians, industrialists and government officials. Now, remember, the government had intercepted these conversations during 2008 and 9 as part of a probe into tax evasions. Ashmit Kumar joins us with more details on this. Ashmit, a major relief for Neera Radia after all of these years.
Well, that appears to be the prima facie view at this stage. The Additional Solicitor General, Aishwarya Bhati, informed the Apex Court that the Supreme Court had directed the CBI to conduct these investigations, preliminary probes. These probes were conducted, preliminary investigations. The reports were submitted before the Apex Court. And from what is coming from the ASG today, it appears that there is no criminality that has been discovered by the CBI. That is the view that is coming from the Additional Solicitor General. Let's also keep in mind that the Apex Court also, to substantiate that, has sought for formal updated status reports from the CBI, has given time to the CBI to come back and file those updated reports. And that's perhaps when the court is expecting more clarity on what the CBI discovered in the first place. But nonetheless, important to note that the Supreme Court, these proceedings happened during Supreme Court hearing Ratan Tata's application. Ratan Tata had filed an application in the top court essentially saying that his fundamental right to life had been prejudiced, had been hurt on account of leakage of those Radia tapes, and towards that end has sought two actions. Number one, has sought action against those responsible for the leaks, and number two, has sought a clarification, a restrictive order from the court that since these tapes were originally, since these conversations were intercepted for purposes of tax evasion, it cannot be used for any other purpose. That's the order that he's seeking from the Apex Court. The Supreme Court, for now, is placing the matter for further hearing on October 12th. Also important to note that there is a PIL in this case by Centre filed by the Centre for Public Interest Litigation. They are seeking, citing public interest for making these tapes public and for allowing them to be, for sharing them on the public domain. That's another application that will be decided. So clearly, more clarity awaited on October 12th. For now, the ASG informing the court that CBI has not found any criminality in those conversations.
Ashman, thanks very much for taking us through that. And of course, we will have you back once there is an update. Now, the Congress Party's presidential polls will be held on the 17th of October. After meeting Sonia Gandhi yesterday, senior Congress leader and MP Shashi Tharoor visited the AICC office to meet the Central Election Authority members. Now, sources have told us that Tharoor is keen on applying for this post, but he's not alone. Rajasthan Chief Minister Ashok Gehlot is also in New Delhi to meet Sonia Gandhi. Gehlot is among other senior leaders who are vying for the Congress president's post. And before we wrap, the government has made new appointments to the PM Cares Fund. Ratan Tata has been named as a trustee along with former Supreme Court Judge K.T. Thomas and BJP leader Karya Munda